behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, whispers travel faster than royal decrees. Staff members exchange glances in marble corridors. Security guards speak in hushed tones during shift changes. Even the Queen's beloved corgis seem restless, pacing the grand halls as if sensing the storm brewing within the monarchy's most sacred walls. What started as a routine inventory check in the Tower of London has spiraled into the biggest crisis King Charles has faced since ascending the throne. Ancient jewels worth millions have vanished without explanation. Pieces that have adorned British royals for centuries are simply gone. But this isn't just about missing diamonds and emeralds. Palace insiders speak of heated midnight meetings, of trusted advisors being questioned under oath, and of a king who hasn't slept properly in weeks. The very foundation of the crown's integrity hangs in the balance. As investigative teams work around the clock and security footage is analyzed frame by frame, one question echoes through the ancient stones of Windsor Castle: how do you steal from the most protected collection in the world? And, more importantly, who had the access, the knowledge, and the audacity to pull it off? The monarchy has weathered scandals before, but never has the crown itself been at risk. Never have the symbols of British heritage disappeared into thin air. This is more than theft, it's an attack on history itself. What you're about to discover will shake your understanding of royal security, family loyalty, and the price of absolute power. Because sometimes, the greatest threats come from within the very walls meant to protect the crown. The story begins on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning when a single phone call changed everything. The morning of October 15th began like any other at Buckingham Palace. King Charles had risen at precisely 6:30, as was his custom, and was reviewing state papers in his private study when the call came through. The ornate golden telephone on his mahogany desk rarely rang this early unless there was an emergency. When he lifted the receiver, the trembling voice on the other end belonged to Sir Edmund Hartwell, keeper of the crown jewels. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid we have a situation," Sir Edmund's voice cracked through the line. "Several pieces from the crown collection appear to be missing." Charles felt his coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips. The crown jewels were more than mere ornaments, they were the physical embodiment of 1,000 years of British monarchy. Each piece told a story of conquest, ceremony, and continuity stretching back to medieval times. Missing? Charles set down his cup with deliberate care. "Explain yourself, Edmund." "The quarterly inventory began yesterday evening, Your Majesty. We discovered that 3 significant pieces are unaccounted for: the flame lily brooch gifted by the Commonwealth nations, the sapphire earrings worn by Her late Majesty at her coronation, and..." Sir Edmund's voice caught. "The St. Edward sapphire from the imperial state crown." The blood drained from Charles's face. The St. Edward sapphire wasn't just valuable, it was legendary. Supposedly worn by Edward the Confessor in his ring, it had been set into every monarch's crown since 1661. Its disappearance wasn't theft, it was sacrilege. "Have you informed security?" Charles demanded. "Yes, Your Majesty. The tower is in lockdown. No one enters or leaves without explicit authorization." "But, sir..." Sir Edmund hesitated. "The CCTV footage shows no unauthorized access. Whoever did this had clearance." Charles's mind raced. Only a handful of people possessed the security codes and biometric access needed to enter the jewel house after hours. Each was vetted by MI5, sworn to absolute secrecy, and bound by oaths that dated back centuries. "I want everyone with access questioned immediately," Charles ordered. "And, Edmund, not a word of this leaves the tower until we understand what we're dealing with." But, even as he spoke, Charles knew containment would be impossible. The palace employed over 800 people, from senior advisors to kitchen staff. Secrets had a way of seeping through the ancient walls like water through stone. By 10 o'clock that morning, an emergency meeting had been called in the blue drawing room. Around the polished conference table sat the most trusted members of the royal household: Private Secretary Sir Clive Alderton, Master of the Household Tony John Stonebert, and newly appointed Keeper of the Privy Purse Michael Stevens. Their faces reflected the gravity of the situation. "Gentlemen," Charles began, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "We are facing an unprecedented crisis. the integrity of the crown has been compromised. Sir Clive adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles. Your Majesty, we must consider all possibilities. This could be an inside job, but it might also be the work of professional thieves with sophisticated knowledge of our security systems. Professional thieves don't just walk into the Tower of London, Tony interjected. The security measures their rival Fort Knox. Pressure-sensitive floors, infrared beams, motion detectors, the place is a fortress. Michael Stevens, who had been quietly reviewing financial records on his tablet, looked up grimly. Your Majesty, I've been checking our insurance policies. The total value of the missing pieces is approximately £47 million. But, the historical significance, that's incalculable. The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy shroud. These weren't just expensive baubles that could be replaced. They were irreplaceable links to British history, symbols that connected the present monarchy to its ancient roots. Charles stood and walked to the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. Outside, tourists gathered at the gates, taking selfies and hoping for a glimpse of royal life. They had no idea that just beyond those iron railings, their king was grappling with a scandal that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. What about the staff at the tower? Charles asked without turning around. We've begun preliminary interviews, Sir Clive replied. Every keeper, guard, and maintenance worker is being questioned. But, Your Majesty, we must be careful. If word leaks that we're investigating our own people, it will look like we suspect treachery from within, Charles finished. The press will have a field day. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The British tabloids, already hungry for royal scandals, would pounce on this story with unprecedented ferocity. Headlines writing themselves, crown jewels vanish. Royal security fails. Who robbed the king? By afternoon, the investigation had expanded. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Morrison from the Metropolitan Police's art crime team arrived at the palace with a small team of specialists. Her reputation preceded her. She had recovered stolen artwork from private collections across Europe and had an impressive track record with high-profile theft cases. Your Majesty, DCI Morrison said as she was escorted into Charles's private office. I want to assure you that this investigation will be handled with absolute discretion. Charles studied the woman before him. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 40, with sharp green eyes and prematurely gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her manner was professional but not deferential, exactly what he needed in this situation. Inspector Morrison, I trust you understand the delicate nature of this matter. Beyond the monetary value these pieces represent the continuity of the British crown, she finished. Yes, Your Majesty, I understand completely. I've studied the provenance of each missing item. What concerns me most is the precision of this theft. How do you mean? Whoever took these pieces knew exactly what they were after. They didn't grab the most obviously valuable items. The imperial state crown itself remains untouched, as does the sovereign's scepter. Instead, they selected pieces that are incredibly significant but might not be immediately missed during routine tours. This observation sent a chill down Charles's spine. It suggested not just inside knowledge, but intimate familiarity with the crown's collection and security procedures. We're dealing with someone who knows our systems better than most of our own staff, Charles said quietly. That's my assessment as well, Your Majesty. This wasn't opportunistic. It was planned, probably for months. As evening approached, more disturbing details emerged. The security footage showed no signs of tampering, but there were curious gaps in the recordings, brief moments where cameras seemed to malfunction or lose signal. Each gap lasted exactly 93 seconds, just long enough for someone to move quickly through specific corridors. Even more troubling was the discovery that the security codes had been changed 3 days before the theft, ostensibly for routine maintenance. The person who authorized those changes? Assistant Keeper James Whitmore, a man who had served the crown faithfully for 15 years and whose background check was spotless. When questioned, Whitmore appeared genuinely shocked and confused. Your Majesty, I received the maintenance request through proper channels. The authorization came from the security department with all the correct protocols. But, when investigators checked with the security department, no such maintenance had been scheduled. As night fell over London, Charles found himself alone in his study, staring at portraits of his predecessors. Kings and queens who had worn the very jewels now missing, who had carried the weight of the crown through wars, scandals, and social upheavals. What would they think of his failure to protect their legacy? The secure phone on his desk rang again. This time it was DCI Morrison. "Your Majesty, we've made a discovery." The jewels weren't just stolen, they were replaced with incredibly sophisticated forgeries. Museum-quality replicas that would fool casual observation. Charles felt his heart skip. Replaced? How long ago? That's the question, sir. The forgeries are so good that they could have been in place for weeks, maybe months, without anyone noticing. This wasn't a smash-and-grab operation. This was an elaborate, long-term deception. The implications were staggering. If the jewels had been replaced months ago, it meant someone had been planning this theft while the nation mourned Queen Elizabeth II passing and celebrated Charles's accession to the throne. Someone had been plotting against the crown during its most vulnerable transition in 70 years. Inspector Morrison, I want you to expand your investigation. Look into every person who had access during the transition period. Every temporary worker, every contractor, every dignitary who toured the collection. Already underway, Your Majesty. But, sir, there's something else. The quality of these forgeries suggests serious funding. We're not dealing with ordinary criminals. This operation would have required significant financial backing and access to master craftsmen. After hanging up, Charles walked to his private safe and withdrew a locked journal, his most private thoughts and concerns about the challenges facing the modern monarchy. He had never imagined writing an entry about stolen crown jewels. Day one of the greatest crisis of my reign, he wrote carefully. The symbols of our heritage have vanished, replaced by lies made of glass and base metal. But, perhaps what troubles me most is the realization that someone close to the crown, someone we trusted, has betrayed not just me but 1,000 years of British history. Outside his windows, London continued its evening rhythm. Buses rumbled past carrying commuters home from work. Restaurants filled with diners enjoying their meals. The city lived on, unaware that their king sat alone in his study, wondering if the crown he had inherited was already broken beyond repair. The investigation was just beginning, but Charles already understood that this was more than theft. It was an attack on the very idea of monarchy, designed to undermine public faith in the institution he had spent his entire life preparing to lead. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, new questions, and new challenges. But tonight, King Charles III sat in his study and contemplated the possibility that he might be the monarch who lost the crown jewels forever. Dawn broke grey and cold over London as King Charles arrived at the Tower of London for his first personal inspection of the crime scene. The ancient fortress, which had served as royal palace, prison, and treasure house for nearly 1,000 years, felt different somehow. The weight of history that usually comforted him now seemed oppressive, as if the very stones were judging his failure to protect their secrets. DCI Morrison met him at the entrance, flanked by forensics experts and security specialists. Your Majesty, we've made significant progress overnight. I'm afraid this situation is more complex than we initially believed. They walked through the corridors that millions of tourists traversed each year, but now the familiar path felt ominous. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats, every corner could conceal watching eyes. In the jewel house, Charles stood before the display cases that should have held his family's most precious possessions. The forgeries were remarkable, even knowing they were fake, he found it difficult to spot the differences. The craftsmanship was museum quality, requiring not just skill but access to detailed photographs and measurements that weren't available to the public. The forger had to know the exact dimensions, weight distribution, even the specific flaws in the original gems, Morrison explained. This level of detail suggests someone with legitimate scholarly or professional access to the collection. Dr. Helena Ashworth, the Tower's chief historian, approached them nervously. Her usually composed demeanor had been shattered by the discovery that pieces she had studied for decades were nothing but elegant lies. Your Majesty, she began hesitantly, I've been reviewing our visitor logs and research access records. Over the past 18 months, we've had several academic requests for detailed documentation of the missing pieces. Charles felt his pulse quicken. Academic requests? Yes, sir. Researchers working on books, documentaries, museum exhibitions. All properly credentialed, all with legitimate institutional backing. But, now. She trailed off, the implications clear. Now we know that one of them might have been gathering intelligence for a heist, Morrison finished grimly. They moved to the security office, where banks of monitors displayed feeds from dozens of cameras throughout the tower complex. The head of security, Colonel Marcus Pembridge, was a former SAS officer whose military bearing couldn't hide his obvious distress at this breach. Your Majesty, we've identified the pattern, Pembridge said, pointing to timestamps on multiple screens. The gaps in our surveillance occurred at precisely timed intervals over the past 3 weeks. Someone mapped our security cycles down to the second. But, how is that possible? These systems are classified. That's what troubles us most, sir. The timing suggests either inside knowledge or months of careful observation. We're looking at both possibilities. Morrison pulled up a chair beside the monitors. Colonel, show His Majesty what we discovered about the maintenance requests. Pembridge typed rapidly, bringing up a series of emails and work orders. The requests came through our normal channels, but we've traced them back to a series of shell companies. Dummy corporations designed to look legitimate but actually controlled by unknown parties. Charles studied the screen, noting the professional appearance of the documents. This wasn't amateur work. Far from it, Your Majesty. We're dealing with people who understand both technology and bureaucracy. They exploited our own protocols against us. As they reviewed the evidence, Charles's private secretary arrived with news that made his stomach clench. Your Majesty, we have a problem. The press is asking questions. Sir Clive's face was pale as he delivered the news. The Evening Standard called this morning. They're running a story about unusual activity at the tower. Increased security, police presence. They don't know specifics yet, but they're investigating. Charles closed his eyes briefly. He had hoped for more time before the media storm broke. How long do we have? Perhaps 24 hours before someone connects the dots. Your Majesty, we need to consider our response options. The group moved to a private conference room where they could discuss strategy without the risk of being overheard. The walls were lined with portraits of previous monarchs, their painted eyes seeming to watch disapprovingly as Charles grappled with a crisis none of them had ever faced. What are our options? Charles asked. Morrison leaned forward. We could go public immediately, control the narrative. Announce that we're investigating a security breach and ask for the public's help in locating the missing items. That would be admitting the theft succeeded, Sir Clive objected. It would raise questions about the competence of royal security, potentially undermining public confidence in all our institutions. But the alternative is worse, Morrison countered. If the press breaks this story without our input, they'll create their own narrative. And that narrative probably won't be kind to the palace. Colonel Pembridge had remained silent, but now he spoke up. Your Majesty, there's another consideration. If this theft was designed to embarrass the monarchy, the thieves might be planning to make the crime public themselves. They might have photographs, videos, evidence they intend to release. The thought hadn't occurred to Charles, but it made perfect sense. Why steal symbols of the crown unless you plan to use them against the institution they represented? We need to find out who's behind this before they dictate terms to us, Charles said firmly. That afternoon brought a breakthrough, though not the kind they had hoped for. Dr. Ashworth burst into the conference room with a laptop, her face flushed with excitement and fear. Your Majesty, I've found something. One of our research requests came from someone claiming to represent the Smithsonian Institution. I called their medieval artifacts department this morning. She opened her laptop and showed them an email exchange. They have no record of the researcher who contacted us. The credentials were forged. Morrison studied the screen. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, claiming to be working on a comparative study of royal regalia. She had access to the collection for 6 separate visits over 8 months. I remember her, Dr. Ashworth said. Middle-aged woman, very knowledgeable about medieval craftsmanship. She spent hours photographing and measuring the pieces that are now missing. Charles felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Show me her visitor records. The documentation was meticulous: photographs, fingerprints, background checks that had apparently satisfied security at the time. But now they saw the deception. The woman who had called herself Margaret Thornfield had used sophisticated identity theft to create an entirely fictional persona. She was here as recently as 2 weeks before the theft, Pembridge noted. Final reconnaissance. But why these specific pieces? Charles asked. If she could access the collection freely, why not take the most valuable items? Morrison had been studying the profiles of the missing jewels. I think I know. Your Majesty, the items she chose all have one thing in common: they're pieces that are frequently photographed but rarely examined closely by the public. Meaning? Meaning she could have replaced them with forgeries months ago, and no one would have noticed until the quarterly inventory. She bought herself time to plan the perfect crime. The afternoon brought another disturbing development. Sir Clive received a call from the palace press office. Journalists were now asking specific questions about the crown jewels. Someone had leaked information about the investigation. How much do they know? Charles demanded. Enough to be dangerous, Your Majesty. They're asking about police presence at the tower, about changes to the public tour schedule, about whether any items from the collection are missing. Charles paced to the window, looking out over the Thames. The river had flowed past this fortress for 1,000 years, carrying the secrets of kings and queens to the sea. Now it might carry away the reputation of his monarchy as well. We have to assume the worst, he said finally. Someone inside our investigation is talking to the press. We need to limit information to only the most essential personnel. Morrison nodded grimly. I've had the same thought, Your Majesty. The details the journalists are asking about could only come from someone with direct knowledge of our discoveries. The realization that they might be dealing with multiple conspirators, the original thieves, and now a leak within their own investigation, added a new layer of paranoia to an already tense situation. As evening approached, Charles made the difficult decision to return to Buckingham Palace. He needed to brief the Privy Council and prepare for the possibility that the story would break in tomorrow's newspapers. But, before leaving the tower, he stood alone in the jewel house one more time. The display cases hummed quietly under their protective lighting, casting shadows that danced across the walls. The remaining genuine pieces seemed to mock him, proof that his protection had failed, that the unbroken chain of royal custody stretching back centuries had been severed on his watch. His phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. Your Majesty, we have what belongs to you. If you want to see your precious baubles again, you'll need to make some difficult choices. Tomorrow's papers will carry our first message. Consider it a demonstration of our reach. Charles stared at the screen, his hands trembling slightly. The thieves weren't just criminals, they were playing a larger game, using the stolen jewels as pawns in an attack on the monarchy itself. He forwarded the message to Morrison immediately, but he already knew what her response would be. They were no longer dealing with a theft investigation. They were in the middle of a carefully orchestrated assault on the crown, and the next phase was about to begin. As his car pulled away from the Tower of London, Charles watched the ancient fortress disappear into the gathering darkness. Tomorrow, the world would learn that the crown jewels had vanished. Tomorrow, his reign would face its greatest test. But tonight, he had to accept a terrible truth: somewhere in the shadows, enemies of the monarchy were preparing their next move, and he had no idea how to stop them. The game was no longer about recovering stolen jewels. It was about saving the crown itself. The morning newspapers hit the stands at exactly 6 o'clock, and, within minutes, King Charles's worst fears became reality. The headline screamed across every front page in Britain: Crown Jewels Stolen. Royal Security Catastrophe. Who robbed the king? But it wasn't just the theft that dominated the coverage. Somehow, the conspirators had provided the press with photographs, clear, detailed images of the empty display cases, the sophisticated forgeries, even internal security footage that should have been classified. The leak wasn't just sharing information, they were orchestrating a complete media assault. Charles sat in his private study at 7 that morning, surrounded by every major newspaper in the country. Each told the same story with slight variations, but all carried details that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of the investigation. Sir Clive burst into the room without his usual formal announcement. "Your Majesty, the phones haven't stopped ringing. Every news organization in the world is demanding a statement. The palace switchboard is overwhelmed." "What about Parliament?" Charles asked, though he dreaded the answer. "The Prime Minister is calling an emergency session. Opposition leaders are demanding explanations about national security." "Your Majesty, this isn't just a royal crisis anymore, it's becoming a constitutional one." The magnitude of the disaster was still sinking in when DCI Morrison arrived with her team. Her usually composed demeanor showed cracks of stress and frustration. "Your Majesty, we've analyzed how the press obtained those photographs. They didn't come from our investigation files, they were taken by the thieves themselves. This whole operation was designed to maximize public embarrassment." Charles studied the newspaper photos again. They weren't blurry security footage or hastily snapped images. They were professionally lit, carefully composed shots that told a story of royal failure and incompetence. "They wanted us to look foolish," he said quietly. "More than that, sir. They wanted to undermine public faith in the monarchy's ability to protect British heritage. This was political from the beginning." The morning brought a parade of emergency meetings. The Privy Council convened an emergency session, their faces grim as they discussed the constitutional implications of the crisis. Senior members of Parliament arrived for briefings, their questions growing more pointed with each revelation. But the most disturbing development came from MI5. Director General Sir Andrew Parker arrived at the palace with intelligence that changed everything. "Your Majesty, we've identified the organization behind the theft," he said, settling into a chair in the secure conference room. "They call themselves the Republic Foundation, a well-funded group advocating for the abolition of the monarchy." Charles felt his blood run cold. "Abolitionists? More sophisticated than traditional Republican movements, sir. They've been operating for several years, funded by anonymous donors and staffed by former intelligence operatives. Their goal isn't just political change, they want to prove that the monarchy is obsolete by demonstrating its vulnerabilities." Sir Andrew opened a classified file containing surveillance photographs and intelligence reports. "The woman who called herself Dr. Margaret Thornfield is actually Dr. Sarah Chen, a former curator at the British Museum who was dismissed 3 years ago for attempting to sell artifacts to private collectors." "And now she's working with Republicans?" "It appears so, Your Majesty. The Republic Foundation recruited her specifically for this operation. They needed someone with legitimate academic credentials and detailed knowledge of royal collections." Morrison leaned forward, studying the photographs. "What about the technical aspects? The security breaches, the forged credentials? They have backing from sources we're still identifying. But the sophistication suggests state-level resources or extremely wealthy private sponsors. This isn't amateur activism, it's professional destabilization." The afternoon brought the next phase of the attack. At exactly 2 o'clock, every major news organization received identical packages containing detailed dossiers on royal security failures, financial irregularities in palace operations, and allegations about the true cost of maintaining the monarchy. The crown jewels theft had been just the opening move. Now the Republic Foundation was weaponizing years of research into royal vulnerabilities, turning the investigation into a broader assault on the institution itself. "Your Majesty," Sir Clive said as he reviewed the leaked documents, "they've been planning this for years. Every detail about palace operations, every security protocol, every financial arrangement, they have it all." Charles realized they weren't just dealing with jewelry thieves. They were confronting an organization that had methodically identified and exploited weaknesses in the monarchy's armor, using the crown jewels as bait to launch a coordinated attack on royal legitimacy. The public response was swift and brutal. Social media exploded with criticism of royal security, questions about the cost of protecting useless trinkets, and debates about whether Britain needed a monarchy at all. The Republic Foundation had achieved their goal. They had turned a criminal investigation into a constitutional crisis. But Charles refused to surrender. That evening, he made a decision that surprised even his closest advisors. Instead of hiding behind palace walls, he would go on the offensive. "I want to address the nation directly," he announced to his staff. "Live television, tomorrow evening. No prepared remarks from the press office, I'll speak from the heart about what the crown means to Britain." Sir Clive was horrified. "Your Majesty, the risk is enormous. If you say the wrong thing, you could make this crisis worse." "The crisis can't get worse," Charles replied. "Our enemies are using our silence against us. They're controlling the narrative because we're letting them. That ends now." Meanwhile, Morrison's investigation had taken a dramatic turn. Using financial intelligence provided by MI5, they had traced the Republic Foundation's funding to a network of offshore accounts connected to several individuals with strong motives for seeing the monarchy abolished. "Your Majesty, we've identified at least 3 major donors," Morrison reported. 2 are wealthy businessmen who've been denied honors despite significant charitable contributions. The third is more concerning, a former palace insider who was dismissed for selling access to private royal events. The personal betrayal stung more than Charles had expected. Someone who had sworn loyalty to the crown, who had been trusted with intimate knowledge of royal operations, had turned that trust into a weapon. "Do we know where the actual jewels are?" Charles asked. "We're close, sir. The network is sophisticated, but they've made mistakes. We believe the items are being held in a secure location in Switzerland, probably in a private vault owned by one of their financial backers. Can we retrieve them? Possibly, but it will require international cooperation and significant legal maneuvering. The Swiss authorities are being helpful, but the perpetrators chose their hiding place well. Switzerland's banking privacy laws make this complicated." As the week progressed, the media storm intensified. Opinion polls showed declining support for the monarchy, with younger voters particularly critical of the institution's ability to protect national treasures. The Republic Foundation had succeeded in framing the theft as evidence that the crown was an expensive anachronism that couldn't even secure its own possessions. But Charles's decision to address the nation directly was already changing the dynamic. Rather than hiding from criticism, he was preparing to face it head-on. His speechwriters worked around the clock, but Charles insisted on writing the most important sections himself. "The British people deserve honesty," he told them. "They deserve to know that their king takes responsibility for this failure, but also that he won't let criminals and conspirators destroy an institution that has served this nation for 1,000 years." The breakthrough came on Friday afternoon. Swiss authorities, working with Interpol and the Metropolitan Police, had located the storage facility where the crown jewels were being held. The raid was planned for dawn Saturday, time to prevent the thieves from moving the items again. Charles insisted on being informed immediately when the operation began. He sat in his study through the early morning hours, waiting for word from Switzerland while putting the finishing touches on his speech to the nation. At 6:15 London time, his secure phone rang. Morrison's voice was triumphant but exhausted. "Your Majesty, we have them. All 3 pieces, exactly as they were stolen." The Swiss police arrested 4 individuals at the facility, including Dr. Sarah Chen. Charles felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew the larger battle was far from over. "What about the Republic Foundation?" "Still investigating, sir. But we've identified several key figures, and more arrests are expected." "Your Majesty, this was bigger than we thought. They were planning to auction the jewels online, with the proceeds funding a massive campaign to abolish the monarchy." The irony was bitter but appropriate. They had planned to use the symbols of royal authority to finance the destruction of the institution those symbols represented. Saturday evening, King Charles appeared on live television to address the nation. He stood not in the formal throne room or ornate state chambers, but in his private study, surrounded by books and personal photographs that humanized him for viewers. My fellow Britons, he began, this week, criminals stole more than jewels from our national collection. They attempted to steal your confidence in the institutions that bind our nation together. He spoke for 12 minutes, taking full responsibility for the security failures while explaining the sophisticated nature of the attack on the crown. Most importantly, he reframed the crisis not as royal incompetence, but as an assault on British heritage by enemies of democracy. These were not ordinary thieves, he said, looking directly into the camera. They were political extremists who used criminal means to attack the constitutional foundation of our democracy. They believed that by making the crown look weak, they could convince you to abandon the monarchy altogether. The speech worked. Opinion polls conducted immediately afterward showed a significant shift in public sentiment. By taking responsibility while revealing the political nature of the attack, Charles had transformed himself from victim to defender of British values. The crown jewels were returned to the Tower of London in a ceremony deliberately designed to show royal resilience. Charles himself placed each piece back in its proper setting, witnessed by cameras from around the world. The message was clear: the crown had survived another challenge, stronger than before. The trials of the Republic Foundation conspirators would continue for months, revealing the full scope of their planned assault on the monarchy. Dr. Sarah Chen received 8 years in prison, while her accomplices faced various sentences for their roles in the conspiracy. But, perhaps the most important outcome was the transformation of King Charles III himself. The crisis that could have destroyed his reign instead revealed his character under pressure. He had faced the greatest challenge to the monarchy in decades and emerged not just victorious, but strengthened. In his private journal that night, Charles wrote, "Today we recovered more than stolen jewels. We recovered the nation's faith in the institution of monarchy itself. The crown endures not because of the gold and gems that symbolize it, but because of the strength of the people who defend it." The crown jewels had returned home, but, more importantly, so had public confidence in the king who wore them. The greatest crisis of his reign had become its defining triumph, proving that even in the modern world, the ancient institution of monarchy could adapt, survive, and prevail against those who sought to destroy it. The symbols of royal authority once again gleamed under the lights of the Tower of London, but they meant something different now. They were no longer just historical artifacts, they were proof that the crown could weather any storm, face any enemy, and emerge stronger than before. King Charles III had saved more than jewels. He had saved the monarchy itself.